What is the right thing? We live in a culture where we all like to be right, but what does it actually mean to do the right thing or to be right? And the key lies in data. And this is a very politically murky terrain because as in the book, How to Lie with Statistics, there's all kinds of ways to carve out data to support this theory or that theory. But the right thing is the behavior or pattern of behavior that leads to the most well-being over time for all concerned, for the largest number of people. And in this sense, it's relative. So in any given situation where we have a choice, we have at least two options. And one of these options, statistically, is going to deliver more well-being within the area being measured than the other. And that last bit is important because one of the reasons we get so crazy around all the health bizarreness of, is chocolate good for you or bad for you? Is red wine good for you or bad? Is it partly depends what's measured. And one of the things that we have failed in many respects to do as a culture is develop holographic thinking, where we simultaneously measure all the different things that are important. In other words, if drinking alcohol kills X% of brain cells and drinking a glass of red wine boosts heart function, what's the cost-benefit analysis? How many brain cells are lost to benefit the heart and things like this nature? And so there are a number of sectors around data where we are not intelligent enough to present the data clearly enough to follow the data intelligently. But there are other areas where we are. And if, for example, wearing seat belts increases the chance of surviving a head-on collision by, let's say 78%. And not wearing a seat belt decreases that possibility by 78%. Then, as far as safety is concerned and longevity, then seat belts are a definitely good idea. And they become enshrined as a best practice. Now, they are, of course, not the best practice because there are better seatbelt designs, and far better than seatbelt designs for accidents is the data coming out of Tesla Motor Company that after more than 1 billion miles driven in Tesla's autopilot, the fatalities and accident rates while autopilot is on are 800% less, 8 times more safe than human drivers on average. And so on average, one could say that by getting a Tesla car and pressing autopilot on, the odds of you and other people avoiding an accident go up 800%. And some of this data is skewed because mostly autopilot is done on highways, and highways may not be the biggest area of fatalities and stuff. So maybe it's only 4 times better or twice as good once all those anomalous, other situations are taken into account. But the data is clear. If you care about human life, turn on autopilot. and human life flourishes. Now, around data-based decisions, the people involved are not relevant. And this is very different than politics, because in politics, the people are everything, and data is often thrown out the window in order to keep people in power that do not necessarily belong in power. You have the political domain, which is about loyalty to individuals and the pursuit of power. And you have data-based decisions or rightness that has to do with taking the course of the courses available that lead to more well-being. Now, the number one role of a leader, teacher, guide, professional, therapist, school, or public nonprofit is to inform themselves of the best practices involved in their given field, and to believe in the beliefs that lead to the embodiment of those best practices. And those two are closely linked. If you believe that you will be screwed by following a best practice, you're not going to do it. So the belief comes first, and action is embodied belief. We always act consistent with what we believe will work. What will help us and other people survive, feel secure, feel a sense of love and belonging, develop a sense of self-esteem, develop our human needs. We act consistently with the beliefs and the behaviors that we think will work. So the number one job of a leader in any field is to familiarize themselves with the practices that have the most supportive data associated with them, and to look for the most undoctored data. So what's doctored data? Well, the OxyContin family, when helping to participate the opioid crisis in America, discovered, of course, that OxyContin was incredibly addictive. But they also discovered that if they did enough studies, that some of the studies didn't highlight the negatives as much and seemed to showcase the positives. And so they did a number of studies, and they hid the studies, meaning they did not publish the studies that were unfavorable to their drug. And in doing so created a false impression about the risk of opioids. In doing so, they endangered millions of lives with a false sense of safety based on falsified data. Now, false data is just incomplete data. You see, if you ask me, is this a good deal? And I say you will make $100 million in revenue. It is a great deal. That may be true. But if I leave out the fact that in order to get $100 million in revenue, you're going to have to spend $200 million in expenses, such that your net profit, after all your revenue and all your expenses are deducted, is a $100 million loss, as opposed to a $100 million profit, then it is not a good deal. And all I had to do that was to hide a little bit of the data. A very important line item. Just delete the expense line item. Then you have revenue, no expenses, and 100% net profit. It's wonderful. You just delete some of the data, and something can look magnificent or it can look horrible. Let's say the reverse is true, and you say, well, this is a terrible purchase because there are $100 million of expenses. Oh my goodness. And you delete the revenue. Well, if there's $300 million in revenue and $100 million in expenses, you've got a bottom line of $200 million in profit. You add in the revenue, it's a great deal. You delete the revenue and just show the expense, it's a horrible deal. And so truth is all about including all of the relevant data. And one thing we could say is that you are not in a position to make a competent choice of any kind without knowing all of the relevant data. And so it is a best practice. People make better decisions with a more comprehensive set of data than they do with less, which is why suppressing data, willful ignorance, in professional circles, often criminal negligence associated with willful ignorance, is one of the biggest crimes, because it can lead large numbers of people, particularly when reputable sources suppress data, to make the exact wrong decision based on misinformation by suppressing the truth. This is why when Ann Watts encouraged me not to tell the community what had gone on with Peter Sandhill, and when I learned from Jason Weston that the board had met, as well as the facilitators, behind closed doors, meaning I was the only person who needed to be at the center of that, and I was the only person not invited. When I learned that, I outlined a list of reasons why, for the mission of the Human Awareness Institute, this information must be public, and that to be competent, the Human Awareness Institute facilitators must get ahead of the story and turn an incomprehensible and tragic secret, meaning turn a disgusting secret into a palatable truth. Now, how do you do that when you discover that one of your facilitators has sexually abused a participant over a 10-year period under the influence of psychedelics? How do you do that? Well, you've got to explain and figure out how that happened, why it happened, at a very deep level. And you've got to show your commitment to your mission to come out ahead of that data. And you've got to explain what you're going to do about it in terms that the public and the law, etc., would say that is what should be done. Meaning, if people do that, the public will be protected, the mission will be protected, the people will benefit. You know, in a public nonprofit, you get a tax benefit on the condition that people benefit. And it's very important to differentiate and of course, Hyde did not do that. Instead, they began a campaign of information control and suppression that included suing to silence the information they failed to bring forward, and also included ostracizing a sexual abuse survivor in a traumatic state from support by cutting off the email addresses. So these are violation of ethics, because it doesn't matter who does them, but when a leader does them, they have significantly more impact. And so there's a lot more legal accountability. And when anyone does them, you see, we confuse in a relationally illiterate culture, we confuse loyalty with the person with loyalty with a best practice. See, the truth of the matter is that, if you're a police officer and you pull over a stranger who's driving in unsafe road conditions and isn't wearing a seatbelt, and you say, you're not wearing a seatbelt. Why? Why? Well, you're increasing your odds of death. And we don't want people to die in this culture. And so we're going to, if you don't value your own life, because it's valuable. Maybe you value your pocketbook, and so, here's a fine, wear a seatbelt, or we will remove your ability to drive. And then you say, well, what if the policeman pulled over their best friend? And the question is, would you want your best friend to be driving in difficult road conditions without a seatbelt more than you would want a stranger to? Number one. Number two, does the seatbelt care, or the statistical field care, whether you were best friends with the person who died in a road accident or not? And of course, when you're dealing with protocols, safety protocols of all kinds, when you're in a turbulent plane, putting on your seatbelt, don't drink and drive. Would you like, again, whatever the protocol is, its severity, its importance goes up the more human well-being is protected by the practice. That's what makes it really important. Drinking and driving is a good one because you get tremendous family trauma and disruption. You get tremendous shame. Innocent people die. 2 families can be destroyed when you have a drinking and driving. And the odds, the safety level, with just 1 glass of wine, goes down. And with 2 or 3, it goes down and down. And at a certain point, we say that's enough. If you want the right to drive on our roads, you've got to follow these protocols. And so the challenge for you and I in this situation is, what do you do when the leaders who have the role of embodying best practices, that's the role of a leader, to teach the way that's going to create the most well-being for the people involved. Now, this is particularly the case in a professional relationship, because why would you pay someone money to learn worse ways of doing things than you already knew? Like, why would you hire a computer programmer to come up and not only not improve your website, but make your website crash and destroy your laptop in the process? No, you wouldn't do that. You hire a professional to make things better, to model, to study, to learn, and then model the beliefs and attitudes and behaviors that make the situation better. And we consider it unethical when ethics is just another word for best practice and stuff. It's the path that leads to well-being. We consider it unethical when someone takes money and exploits a position of authority and leadership to actually benefit themselves, or attempt to, at the expense of the client. I think this laptop is no good. This is what come up in some of the Apple stores recently, where people bring in Apple products and they're tried to upsell to whole new systems. Oh, we can't find any photos. And then people who are prevented by Apple, meaning Apple is suing aftermarket repair people who then find people's photos and help them repair things. That little $20 fixes could have saved someone $1,000, but that's not good for Apple's bottom line. And so Apple has been taken to court for exploiting belief in the brand to get people to upgrade rather than repair products that could have worked for another 5 or 10 years, but wouldn't have helped Apple's stock price. And here we get into the ethics of, is a company in business to serve its people, its team, and its customers, or is a company in business for short-term profits of the investors at the expense of the people involved? And so what is the right thing around doing the right thing when people are in a role of leadership? Well, President Trump, of course, believes that if you are in power, you have the right to do whatever you damn well please, constitutional law, grab them with grab them in the pussy because you're famous. Famous people don't have to, obey basic courtesy and dignity towards women, and powerful people don't have to obey the law. They just hire and bribe and do this and that. And so this is President Trump's model of reality, that if you've got the mantle of authority, if you convince people that to let you be the leader, then you can do and get away with anything you can get away with. And we are, of course, getting a lesson, meaning it's right there for us every day. We can see what are the consequences of leadership being displayed as if you have the power, you should use it for your personal benefit. Let's send Giuliani over to Ukraine to try and suppress political opposition. Let's have these big conventions at my hotels, even though they're more expensive than other, let's use the leadership position to benefit me. And this is, of course, incredibly delightful as a thought to entertain for any self-absorbed, self-centered ego. Let's do this for me. But of course, we don't respect that. We don't believe that's a good idea. But we're also, there's an incredible hesitancy in so many of us to own our authority, to own our power. Meaning, if we dethrone the leader, I don't feel confident and comfortable. Who am I going to lean on? And so one of the interesting things that Nassim Taleb did in the Black Swan did research to discover who America votes for. And America votes for high degrees of displayed confidence, irrespective of competence. And so if you look at the TV personalities and who's on TV, it is the people who will just flat out say something with complete confidence. And those are the people asked to show up and present. But the statistics show that they are wrong the majority of the time, that the pundits are wrong the majority of time, but we still want to watch them because they're confident as they take us down the garden trail. And so one of the things we can learn from this is that to be in a position of power in the United States, you need to display a certain amount of arrogant confidence, and preferably be a white male. And you will be elected because there is confidence in the cult that if you display those traits, there must be something good there. However, the data also suggests that you are wrong most of the time, that if you vote and elect power based on that position alone, you will elect incompetence. And one of the reasons for that is that the smartest people tend to be more hesitant and have more complex paradigms. Notice all the like in these terms, at this time, in this area. No simple-minded person wants to hear that. What do you mean? Just tell me what to do. What, is this the right way? Is that the wrong way? Tell me what to do. Our least competent and most arrogant figureheads do just that. This is the way it is. That's fake news. This is thing. No, that never happened. They make it up, and it's very, very simple. And it's such a relief for those of us who don't want to think. But the single most important thing that a group of people can do in ensuring their well-being and sustainability, etc., over time is to elect leaders based on competence. Based on competence and care, love and competence, empathy and care for the other, and the willingness to often work your ass off to develop the competency and express that competency for the community. And the law of empathy suggests that you focus on those most in pain. Sexual abuse survivors, trauma survivors, the homeless, traumatized, abused children. You focus on those most minorities. African American men have a very hard time of it in our culture. You focus, so do Native Americans, who are still getting over the shame and the trauma of being lied to, penned up, moved around, bullied, humiliated, butchered, betrayed on so many levels, under the guise of doing them a favor, stealing their children as a favor, all these different things, having all that abuse repackaged as for your own good, something that Alice Miller has written about. Now, it's not good for anyone. One of the worst things that has happened in Trump's life is being elected president. He is not competent. He is not competent to be ethical in the role. So he may go to prison. He's causing harm to the culture. He's doing enormous harm because we made the mistake of electing someone based on image rather than substantive analysis. He lied. We didn't bother to look at the lies. There's a whole history behind Trump and all of his failed various dealings, etc., but we didn't bother to look at it. We just followed the TV image. And this is a crisis of thought, a crisis of thinking, a crisis of self-love. Do we love ourselves enough to learn enough to know what the best practices are and to vote for those? Andrew Yang is doing a terrific job of actually bringing out some of the data that got President Trump elected, but also squarely looking at facts. And it's why I'm supporting him. It doesn't matter as much whether this exact strategy or that exact strategy is the best strategy, but you need to start with a paradigm that embraces data. And so in this project, I'm presenting the data that I've learned over a decade of experiences within the community, within workshops, within working one-on-one with 4 of the facilitators, then expanding that data with well over 1,000 hours of study in the various books around trauma and abuse and therapy and ethics and business practices and legal aspects, to get a sense of the data sets associated with this pattern of interaction. And Hai is correct that this is not personal. Meaning Hai teaches that if someone abuses you or rejects you or loves you, it's not personal. It's a lot about what's going on with that person, or that group. And so it's, first of all, it's good to imagine this in the abstract, that a client, any client, trusted, in this case, Ann Watts, to hire Peter Sandhill to be a psychedelic sitter, and then experience sexual and traumatic abuse in that experience on various levels, which was first denied by Peter Sandhill, even though there's a 10-hour recording. Then it was taken to all of the facilitators. And the facilitators decided, behind closed doors, without ever interviewing me, the facilitators decided that it was not a high issue. It was not an issue of the Human Awareness Institute with a mission of teaching love, intimacy, and healthy sexuality. It was not a part of Hai's mission that was committed to creating a world where everyone wins, to address the fact that one of their own that they chose, trained, recommended unilaterally without caveat and without disclosing the present or the absence of a license, that was not a high issue. So we have lots of different aspects of information omission. So on the basis that it wasn't a high issue, they were not going to talk and engage with me as the Human Awareness Institute. So they were going to suppress data that I asked to share with them. They also weren't going to help repair the sexual abuse and the trauma that it caused because it wasn't a high issue in their terms. And they also didn't want anyone to know that this happened. Why would you not want them to know if it's not a high issue? This is wrong at every level. And so to get a tax break, you need to have an independent board of directors that's designed to correct this type of abuse of power and law breaking. And so the board of directors, I contacted the board of directors when the facilitators not only didn't repair, they refused to apologize for anything. The facilitators at the Human Awareness Institute, what really exploded this into this point where we are today, is that the facilitators of the Human Awareness Institute believe that it is not their place to apologize to a sexual abuse survivor on behalf of an organization that chose, trained, unilaterally recommended, without caveat and without disclosing the absence of a license, that directly resulted in sexual abuse of a high client, a high participant. This doesn't get any more absurd if you're in a humorous mode, or sick if you're in a serious mode. It doesn't get any more sick and serious than this. We're dealing with the same phenomenon of the OxyContin family. We don't want anyone to know the downside of our product. So we're going to expend more energy controlling the information and suppressing human awareness than we are going to disclose. Now you contrast this with Johnson & Johnson when it was discovered, I think that a razor blade or so was in one of their packages. Johnson & Johnson immediately alerted the public. Number one, some of our product has been tampered with. Number two, your safety comes first. Number three, please buy our competitor's product until we have fully sorted this out. You notice? It's all about the customer. It's all about public safety. And four, we are going to spend well over $100 million withdrawing all of the product that has found to have been, there were just a few bottles out of 100 million bottles of dollars worth of product. A few bottles were contaminated. And it wasn't even a guarantee that you wouldn't just, there's a razor blade or something in there, let's just throw that out. And the product was good. Now, what happened to Johnson & Johnson? As soon as the issue was cleared up, first of all, everyone praised them for doing the right thing. You put your customers first. You put their health and safety first. You gave them an alternative. You spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Boy, do we like Johnson & Johnson. And the brand was built by that story. Federal Express, when it was the first story coming out in Excellent Companies, they were inventing a new form of shipping when it absolutely, positively has to get there overnight. And you may not be old, or you may remember, this was a new thing. Anywhere in the world, 24-hour service, incredible. And this required revolutionizing the entire company. And they employed and empowered their their staff to do unbelievably unusual things to fulfill their mission. And what happened was there was an airport that was snowed in, and a Federal Express plane with hundreds of packages in it was grounded as the entire airport was closed. But they had empowered their staff to believe in their mission. So what did one of their staff members do on the ground, in the blizzard, in a snowstorm, with the airport shut down because they had no power? A substation had blown out in the storm. What did a Federal Express? Now, this was not the job description of this guy. He rented a helicopter. He flew to the top of the mountain, was dropped on skis out of the helicopter, which couldn't land. And he repaired the substation of the entire power grid so that the airport got power and the Federal Express plane, along with every other plane, was able to take off to fulfill the mission when it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight. Now, was this guy fired for spending tens of thousands of dollars of company money to hire a helicopter on his own authority to rescue an airport so that Federal Express could deliver on its mission? No. This man got a special award. An award that came to be known with a slogan: "We rent helicopters. We get the job done." Now, this brings tears to my eyes, because this is a level of excellence, a level of dedication, a love that becomes competency to a degree that is so rare. It is so rare in so many of our corporations. And it contrasts with an entire board of directors, an entire facilitator body, a group of team members well aware of what was going on, that says if sexual abuse happens by a high facilitator for profit under the umbrella of the Human Awareness Institute, we keep silent. We keep the secret of the abuser. We enable misinformation and abuse. Do you see how far apart these ethics are? You see, and Federal Express didn't have a mission of the entire world winning. It didn't have a mission including love or into me you see. It didn't have a grandiose name like the Human Awareness Institute. It just got the job done. And of course, if you go into Walmart or Best Buy or Amazon and they send a faulty product and it doesn't work, you get a prompt refund. There is an enormous gap between suppressing and denying sexual abuse by a therapist under the influence of two Schedule I illegal drugs, in the case of a suicidal client asking for help, and some of the best practice examples of for-profit companies. And the question becomes, what is the right thing to do about that? And the right thing for the public is to make sure they have as much information as possible so they can make an informed decision rather than a faulty decision based on misinformation. That is what I am doing. For the team, it is demoralizing, hurtful, and dehumanizing to hold team members to standards that the facilitators are not willing to embody. An apology and full acknowledgement of the team who have donated thousands of hours of their time and tens of thousands of dollars to support a mission undermined by their own facilitators. This is a betrayal, and the team deserve an apology. They also deserve leaders capable of leading who can embody best practices. For the district attorney of Marin, in which the crime occurred, a best practice is to look at all of the various things involved and fire, jail, fine leaders using corrupt abuses of power to make the situation worse, to damage public safety rather than help it. For the state of California, who has granted a tax exemption to High Global, they need to know if there is an independent board of directors who can be counted on by a majority vote to vote in the practices consistent with public safety and the mission, or cover up the secrets of their cronies and dismantle a public nonprofit if it cannot. For the board of directors, they need to resign if they lack the competency to know what the right thing is and appoint trauma therapists, sexual abuse therapists, people with a degree or license in psychology or something that has some awareness of what a best practice is. The point of a board is to guide and hire and fire the staff. If that is impossible to do with High's board, then it is the job of all of us in the public to notify the state of California there is a paper board. You see, how does all this financial fraud take place in these large corporations? They have little payoffs and they appoint board members who like them and who will not put public safety first, who will put the subversive interests of egotistical individuals ahead of public safety when a crime, when an issue comes up. And if you can get a majority of board members bribed or silenced or misinformed, and of course, the protocols are what's at stake here. How would a board of directors make a competent decision about what to do in a sexual abuse case involving the facilitators and a cover-up? How would they do it? How would a doctor understand what's going on with a client who's come out of a hospital sicker than they went in? How would they do it? Might it involve inspecting the client, inspecting the patient? Might it involve gathering data? Well, this is exactly what the Human Awareness Institute did the opposite of. I asked to present data and was told it was not a high issue. We're not only not going to do our job and gather the data, we are going to willfully ignore key legal and ethical data that damages and endangers the life of a paying therapeutic client after being traumatically, sexually abused by a high practitioner. Does that organization have the right to exist with a public tax credit in a state of willful denial while refusing to apologize? The very first step in grasping that something needs to go on. Now, then the question becomes, Peter Sandhill did actually apologize. He first denied the whole thing, and after several months and under duress, he found it in himself to apologize for his abuse. Okay, great. You took money to severely damage a therapeutic client, break the law, and blah, 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 and you apologize. Good, okay. So where's the refund? We believe at the Human Awareness Institute that if a facilitator sexually abuses a client and pushes against the facilitator's denials repeatedly to finally get the thing heard. You see, Peter started lying about it, but he couldn't lie because there was a 10-hour recording. So he lied. I wasn't invited to the meeting, so they believed him. But then they listened to bits of the recording that contradicted what he said, and they still protected him, and they violated public trust by not disclosing his condition, as well as the fitness of the entire facilitator body to lead in best practices around sustainable relationships. This is when you violate trust repeatedly, you cut the life and the blood that flows to love and relationships. Trust is the lifeblood of relationships, and you destroy trust when you suppress information. So the right thing is for the public to know as much about this as they want to and have it be brought to their attention. The right thing is for the board to resign, be replaced, or for the Human Awareness nonprofit to be dissolved, or for a board that is willing and able to do its job to be appointed. One or the other. Those are both good things. The worst thing is to have a power body that doesn't know how to do its job, that has its loyalties politically aligned with the power structure, whether it is abusive or sane. And to get a tax credit to cover up sexual abuse in a school that amplifies sexuality substantially in all of its members. So the right thing is for the facilitators who caused harm to pay the cost and take responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond, to learn, to grow, to hire people more knowledgeable than themselves, and to put public interest ahead of their own egos. And the right thing for the team is to put mission ahead of facilitator loyalty and support this coming to light and participate in the dissolution of the Human Awareness Institute or the transformation into an organization capable of following its mission and owning up when it doesn't and making amends. That is the right thing. And the right thing is for sexual abuse survivors, particularly in the cases of professional negligence and abuse, to speak up about it and refuse to be bullied by abuses of power that include a therapist, Ann Watt, counseling her client to go against all known data around sexual abuse, to be silent rather than speak up and tell the public. The right thing is to analyze the system that led the facilitators and board to behave in lockstep with a deep cultural abuse pattern and to violate the future, the ethics, the safety of themselves, their career, their client, and their mission. To understand the protocols of fear, shame, ignorance, misguided loyalty, You know, you may think you're doing your best friend a favor. Okay, you're my best friend. You can drink and drive. Go ahead. You're my friend. Oh, thank you. You're such a dear friend. Tell that to the family who's had their husband murdered. Thanks, officer, for being such a good friend. The more you care about the people involved, the more doing the right thing, the thing that lines up with the data, is important. Everyone wins when a pattern of behavior shifts from a corrupted, fear-based, ignorant-based pattern of behavior that leads to pain and suffering to a healing-based pattern of behavior that actually works. Everyone wins. Most of all, the abuser. Most of all, the abuser. Because they get to experience something that they did not experience on the way to becoming an abuser. Every abuser has been abused at one level or another, consciously or unconsciously. Patterns are fractal in nature. These facilitators and board members did not invent a single one of these ethical crisis, challenges, behavior patterns. They could have learned them from my parents. They did not invent a single one. These abuse patterns pervade the culture. And it is the culture that needs medicine. It is the culture that needs attention, which does not happen behind closed doors, which is why all of the protocols that I've invited around this, if you look at my suggestions for reinventing the Human Awareness Institute with Safety First, have to do with flooding the situation with information that the facilitators cannot control. Because as soon as you have a president, as soon as you have a CIA, as soon as you have a facilitator body that has made a mistake, that is in control of the flow of information about the mistake, you have a shame-based ego in there that wants to hide because they feel unlovable and they're afraid of being punished. In an abuse cult like ours, that is a real fear, and it dominates the decision-making process, which is why we have a free press in America, somewhat. Why has the Department of Justice sought to reassign a news organization called WikiLeaks that exposes crimes against humanity upon crimes against humanity over and over again by the US government as a foreign intelligence agent? Because the freedom of the press is calling to task the US government around Abu Ghraib. But the US government is abusing its power around Chelsea Manning, around Julian Assange, and around Edward Snowden. The biggest truth tellers of our time are being punished, marginalized, and attacked with resources that were given for public interest, not to cover up abuses of power. I am the #1 voice bringing light to patterns of abuse, shame, traumatic negligence, reenactment of trauma, sexual abuse within the facilitator body, within the organization that is high. And I've had my email account shut out. I've been sued for the first time in my life. And I have been blamed and denied an apology. The pattern is the same. These people playing out their roles as abusers are not the enemy. The pattern is the enemy. The loyalty must be to the best practice, and certainly ejecting anyone who can't embody a best practice, because it harms the country, it harms the organization, it harms the public, it harms you and I. When people in positions of power do not believe in the best practices associated with their field and play out abuse protocols and then use that power to cover it up rather than transform and protect the public. Doing the right thing is clear. What is not clear, given the fact that Julian Assange is being tortured in a British cell getting ready to be exported, given the fact that the person who brought us the story of Abu Ghraib is getting death threats, and given the fact that Joe Biden called numerous countries around the world to hunt down and threaten them for giving Edward Snowden asylum, for protecting the Constitution, the mission, ahead of those in power. It is not clear what the outcome of this will be. It is clear that in our cult, we direct an enormous amount of rage, hatred, and fear onto those individuals who tell us the truth, to our detriment. And we live in the level of corruption, lies, and myopia that we live in as an individual, as a family, as a cult, by intimidating those people who would tell the truth and blaming and shaming them by exclusion, rather than embracing them as any self-loving, self-respecting organization does. We want to hear from the dissidents. Tesla hires hackers to try and crack into the code that communicates between Tesla cars and the company, and gives them tens of thousands of dollars if they can hack the system. Because Tesla cares about security and safety for its customers, and it knows that hackers, dissidents, outsiders, not the party line, are the people that can reveal the flaw that the myopia of company loyalty might hide. Elon knows that his software engineers want to come to him and say, it's perfect, aren't we great? He's interested in the actual safety, so he hires hackers to try and prove his staff wrong for the benefit of public safety, and then they correct the issues. This is not a human awareness institute. It is a shame and hide from the most prescient, relevant patterns and information that needs to be dealt with. And there is only one belief that makes such a pattern intelligent: the belief that the Human Awareness Institute cannot survive if the truth is known. That is the belief behind shame, secrecy, lies, and exclusion. And it is a lie. It is a faulty belief. It is a faulty belief. Even now, 3 facilitators could turn this around by coming out, embracing the truth, apologizing, and demonstrating in embodied action that this is the #1 issue for high safety. If they do not believe in high, they will not do it, and the courts will shut high down, proving the belief accurate. But it is not what I believe. I believe a very few people could turn this around, because at some level, we all want an organization like this to work. We want it to be real. We don't want just yet another story of corrupt. And it doesn't change, by the way. It doesn't change, by the way, if high is shut down. A new organization forms and repeats the pattern. It only changes when the people involved become conscious of the cultural abuse system of which they are a part, understand that this abuse system rewards abuse, and rewards abuse survivors for staying silent, and that the pattern lives in us as a cult, as a culture. You might call it the American way: to deny, deflect, discount, blame other people, distract, refuse to apologize, diminish, shame, attack, and not deal with the issue. But this is the very pattern that an organization such as the Human Awareness Institute is needed to answer. Thank you for doing the right thing. You can add data right now by filling out the detailed questionnaire. You can bring your stories to light, positive and negative, and be part of the story. You can wake up out of the cult abuse system and refuse to play the silence and secrecy game. You can reward those who tell you the truth and withdraw your support from people asking you to choose without having the information available to make a competent decision.